Hi, this is Mark Berry with Done Training. In this demonstration, we're going to show you how to use some of the different layout panels available in WPF. I'm going to start by creating a new project, and that's going to be a WPF application. And in that WPF application, we'll call it Layout. Now, what we're going to show you today is just the normal layout panels that you get right out of the box. You can, of course, create your own if you want to create a custom panel. Basically, the panels describe how to lay out the visual elements on the page. So I'm going to give myself a little bit more room and make my window a little bit bigger. By default, what we get when we create a Windows application in WPF is a grid layout. Now we could change that if we wanted to. We're going to go ahead and start with the grid layout. One of the things that you'll want to do is define the columns. So I can go into my grid, and I want to define my grid columns. So there's column definitions. And inside my column definitions, I'm just going to tell it how many columns I have. I could put some additional information into this column definition, like the size, width, that sort of thing. But for the moment, we'll just make it a plain column definition. And I'm going to make 3 of those, and you can see that visually we're starting to get 3 columns up here. Again, I could also do some of this layout visually if I wanted to. I could adjust the width of the columns, etc., and that would change the XAML down here. In addition to how many columns I have, as you might have guessed, we're going to tell it how many rows we have as well. Okay, so we now have a column definition, tells how many columns there are, row definitions, and now it's time to fill the grid with something. Now, a lot like we would have a table in HTML, we might want to merge some of these together. So we might want to merge these cells or do a column span. So that's what we're going to do first. We're going to go ahead and define for our grid a text block. And this text block is going to have an attached property, which is going to be the grid.column. And so our grid.column is going to be 0. Now, notice that the text block itself doesn't have a column property. If I get my IntelliSense here, there is no column in here. But the grid has a column property. So this is an attached property. This text block is using the grid's column property to fill that out. We're also going to go ahead and tell it where to be grid.row. And we'll set that at 0. So this one's going to go in 0, 0. There's 0 indexed columns. All right, so we've got a 0, 0 text block, and we also want to say grid.column span and tell it how many columns we want it to span. We want it to span 3 columns. And just so we can see a little bit better, I'll also set the background color to something like Alice Blue. Okay, and we'll go ahead and put in some text. This text is too long to fit in one grid square. And you can see that we've got our column span going on, and it's going ahead and going into the second column. As we change our grid a little bit later, it'll go into the third column as well. All right, so that's how we can tell it where to put something. We'll do one more. We'll go ahead and put in a button, and we'll put that in our grid column 1 and grid row 1 as well. Doing this just to show you that we don't have to fill in every column as we go. We can always fill in just columns here and there and leave the others empty and fill them in later if we want to. So go ahead and put in our close button tag there as well and put in some text. Click me. All right, so there's our button. All right, so one type of layout is the grid layout, and it's the default. It's probably the most common one that you'll use. Let's look at a couple of other types of layouts, some other panels. One of them is the dock panel. So I'm going to go ahead and have a dock panel. Now, as I create this dock panel, it's going to give me an error because it says I cannot have 2 two contents for window. Window can only have one thing that is its content. And so I'm going to take grid, and we're actually going to put the grid inside of the dock panel. Alright, so there's our grid inside of the dock panel. Now the default for a dock panel is if you don't tell it what to do with the content, it's going to go ahead and do a fill. So it's sort of filling in the remaining space. But we actually want to use a couple of other panels to show this, and I'm going to have a canvas. That's another type of panel we can use. Canvas is a really simple panel, and the idea with canvas is that it's sort of like the old layout. You can use sort of XY coordinates and place things with your canvas. Now, this canvas doesn't know where to dock at the moment, so I'm going to go ahead and tell it to dockpanel.dock at, and the place I want it to dock is the top. Oops. There we go. Top. Okay, and so now it's across the top, and in order for me to see it, let's go ahead and give it a height of 50 or something, and maybe a background color of black. Make it nice and stand out. Alright, so you can see that this is docked to the top. If I wanted to, I could come down and put in an additional item like a stack panel, and we'll talk more about the stack panel in a second, but it could dock as well to the left. And what we've done is we've put that over here. Again, it's going to need some sort of width in this case so that we can see it well. Give it a width of 100. And now you can see that it's up and down the side. So with the dock panel, as we add things, we need to tell it where to dock them, top or left or right or bottom or something like that. And if we don't tell it where to dock, it sort of fills up the remaining space like the grid there. Okay? Let me go ahead and go back to my canvas. And inside of my canvas, I'm going to put something. We'll make it a text block. And I want the background to contrast nicely, so I'll make it Alice Blue. Alright, so the next thing I want to do is I want to tell this. Let me go ahead and give you some text so you can see this. Hello. Alright. So you can see hello is up here. Now if we don't tell it where to be, my text block is just going to be on my canvas in the top left-hand corner. It'll get a top 0, left 0. And if I wanted to put it over on the right, I can say, I want you to adjust its placement from the canvas's right. There's another attached property. Text block itself doesn't have, again, a right, but canvas does. So right, and I want you to put it 10 pixels over. So from the right, it moves it over 10 pixels. Alright, we might want to come back to Canvas and set its margin. A very common thing to do when we're doing layout is to set a margin. And our margin, in this case, is going to be, let's just go ahead and make it all 8s. It gives it sort of 8 pixels around the canvas itself. So still docked up top, but 8 pixels of margin on the edges there. And there's our hello. One interesting thing that you can do with Canvas is that Canvas has a clip to bounds property that you can set to false. Now what this allows us to do is it allows us to move items inside of the canvas actually out. Normally if I were to move an item inside of the canvas out on the edge, we can set this to say -10 to see this. Normally what happens is it gets clipped off and you don't see the full hello. You'd see like he here, and it would clip the rest of that off. But if we set clip to bounds false, it'll move it out. Now you can't move it outside of the window, but you can move it in this case outside of the canvas. So that's an interesting thing to do with Canvas. Alright, and now I'm going to go back to my stack panel. The stack panel stacks things up. It'll stack them horizontally or vertically, and let's just make a couple of buttons here. And you can see it's making some buttons for us. I'll give our buttons some text to make them easier to see. And we could continue doing this. Now, if I wanted to make my width for the button something smaller, that would be okay. I don't have to fill everything up. It's still going to stack everything up. As I create more buttons, they are just going to be stacked here vertically, which is the default. I could also go to my stack panel and tell it my orientation was different, and I could tell it my orientation was horizontal. If I change my orientation to horizontal, now you can see 1, 2, 3 moving across horizontally. So that's our stack panel. One last thing with the dock panel, now that I've got something in my stack panel, and that is it is okay to stack more than one thing up in the dock panel. Here you can see I've got 3 buttons on this one and 2 on this one. The stack panels, I can stack up multiple things and tell them dock left. The order again does matter, so that if I swapped these, now you can see that those 2 are swapped. And so the order does matter. As I tell it dock left, the first thing to dock left gets docked far left. The same thing is actually true here with our canvas. If I were to move our canvas below our stack panel, now the stack panel gets priority, and so it goes left, and it takes all the space on the left. Previously, the canvas had been first, and it took all the space on the top. So order does matter here as I'm putting things into a dock panel. All right, so the last thing we're going to do is a wrap panel, and we'll do that over on the right. And a wrap panel is a lot like a stack panel. Let's put this one on the right. Okay, and then I might put something like, again, buttons in here. And we'll make button 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, so here go my buttons. Now, you can see that my buttons, it looks like it's acting like a stack panel, but if I start to give these a width, let me go ahead and give my wrap panel a width first. Wrap panel width is going to be 150. And then each one of my buttons' width will be 50. You'll be able to see that it will start to wrap them around. So with our stack panel, if I went off the edge, they would just go off the edge and get clipped. But here, you can see that it's wrapping as well. So it does 1, 2, 3, and then starts wrapping back on the other side, 4, 5. We could also, if we changed these to height, and the orientation went the other direction, orientation was vertical instead of horizontal, and I had enough buttons. Oops. That they would start to wrap as well. And you can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then they start over here again. So that's all of our built-in panel layout controls. We had the grid, the stack panel, the canvas, the dock panel, and the wrap panel.